the things that go into an effective security response plan, and I know Corey and Mike are both going to have a lot to add on these, but think about this as a collaborative effort between your leadership team and your technical teams and your legal teams and your insurer. You want to think about, what do you consider a security incident for your business? And honestly, your insurance might dictate what that is based on the choices that you've made. You might have regulatory requirements, similar to what Mike has called out, that define what is a security incident and who's got the authority to determine it. You want to establish the roles and responsibilities in the plan. Very frequently, I've seen incident response plans go all the way down to the individual person at the individual desk, that original AP clerk, saying, if you're the first person that thinks that there is a security event happening, you have an obligation to be able to raise that to the next authority's attention. But until they acknowledge and they've got the ball, you've got the ball. Let's keep this thing rolling. We don't want time to pass and say, oh, well, it's probably nothing. It might not be nothing. Let's go ahead and get the incident response plan rolling.
What's critical is, if you hold a current cyber insurance policy, you need to know there's essentially two people that you need to call in the event that you have a breach or a security incident. That's going to be, you're going to need to notify your agent, because they're going to do their due diligence to follow up with the insurer. But on most of your insurance policies, there's a page on there that says, in the event that something happens, here is the number to call. So you have two. So I mean, you can notify the agent who's going to make that notification, or you can call yourself. During that event, any notes that you have on the breach are going to be critical to how the insurance reacts. So I mean, you need to start taking note of everything as it's taking place. And then kind of that same idea, I mean, with all of us here on the Gulf Coast that deal with hurricanes, we know that dealing with a storm coming in, that if you have a hole in your roof because of the storm, the insurance companies do want you to throw a tarp up over it so that you can begin to mitigate the losses. Well, it's the same thing with cyber insurance. In the event that a breach occurs, they want you to, remove everybody from the system, secure the network, and assess the damages. Something critical that's been touched on numerous times is that managed detection and response. And the insurers actually have a statistic that if you have MDR in place, MDR policies, procedures, technology in place, that they will be able to respond 50% faster. So I mean, in this situation, time is money. And I mean, as we've all kind of said, it's essential that you respond as quickly as can be.
And so here are some things as you build out your incident response plan, things to start considering. First and foremost, understanding what your risk is. And so every incident response plan is going to be tailored to an individual organization. It's going to be tailored to your needs. In your incident response plan, if the first thing is, hey, I see an anomaly, you need to call the CISO, but you don't have a phone on your desk, well, it's not going to work. You need to make sure that you have things that fit your organization. And so making sure that it's tailored, making sure that it's something that's practical and useful is really, really important. But to that end, you also have to be able to identify what are the critical assets, what are also the critical business operations, business functions that need to come online very quickly. Because it's not just about responding to the incident, figuring out the root cause of the damage, doing the notifications. Ultimately, it's the business. If the business doesn't come back after the breach, any sort of response that you're doing is essentially for naught. So everything you do really has to be with your business in mind and making sure that you can stay resilient. On top of that, you have to look at what are your regulatory obligations. This is going to come from your industry specifically. In some cases, we've seen that regulatory obligations are overlapping and duplicative. And so you may be doing the same reporting requirement for your state that you're doing for the SEC, that you're doing for the Department of Defense, that you're doing for Health and Human Services. And that's okay, but recognize that though you have those obligations very early on and know what the time windows are for each one, because every single state has a different time window for notification. Same with all of the different federal regulators. Some of them are from the date that the breach occurred. Some of them are from the date of the identification of the breach. Some of them are from the date that the data was actually identified as having been breached. Understanding what those timelines are is critically important. And then you get into your industry-specific considerations. And we talked a little bit about the AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon breach earlier. If you're in critical infrastructure, recognize that you are going to be targeted by a nation state. And whether it's probing or for espionage or for a full-on cyber attack, We know that nation states are targeting elements of critical infrastructure. How are you factoring that into your plan? Because if there's a motivated and well-funded nation state actor, the ability for the vast majority of companies to be able to withstand that is almost none. So how do you respond? How do you stay resilient? How do you ensure that business continuity continues and you have the right connections within the federal government that when you need to raise your hand and say, I need an adult, the federal government is going to come in and assist when it's a nation state. And then the final aspect of this is from a contractual perspective. Above and beyond your regulatory obligations, your statutory obligations, you have individual agreements with every one of your vendors, with every one of your clients. In a lot of cases, those individual agreements are going to stipulate that you have to notify them of any security breach to your network within a certain time frame. Make sure you're standardizing those agreements, standardizing those contracts where you're able to, and where you're not, recognize the fact that those timelines exist and make sure that you're meeting it so that you're not in breach of contract, ultimately leading to liability or additional liability after the breach.
As we're talking about building these incident response plans and thinking about what do we have inside our environment that we would most care about if the confidentiality or integrity or availability was at risk. This is as much a technical exercise of understanding what's in your IT environment, what is your cybersecurity landscape, as it is a business exercise. Notice the last thing on this list I've got under data, like customer financial info, high confidentiality, high integrity requirement, medium availability risk. If it wasn't available for a day, we could probably still do what we need to do. If it wasn't available for a month, it would start to really hurt, probably even a week, it would start to hurt. But if the confidentiality was violated, if it was exfiltrated, or the data was changed purposefully to be deceptive, both of those would present potentially a high risk in this sort of scenario. Thinking through the assets that you have inside your environment then lets you call out what's high risk, what's low risk, because your incident response plan, part of it, you can help define to all the team members involved. We consider this asset to be critical because of this. We consider this is not a significant event because of this. The risk is low. And you have to think through what does a confidentiality or an integrity or an availability violation look like for each one of those. And you can use that to steer your business decisions about what is your degree of response to the developing scenario that you've got an indicator about that your team is telling you about.